There we go. So, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I am super excited. I'm kind of having a fangirl moment here with Kara Goldin, the founder and CEO of Hint Water. Before we start, I just have to show everyone I'm a true fan.
Yay!
No, this is not the only
Cheers.
bottle.
Cheers from
Yes,
here.
cheers, cheers. This is not the only bottle I have. My entire fridge on the bottom shelf, it's all Hint Water. So, if you have not tried it, please do. I admit I just found out about it recently, as I just told Kara, and I am obsessed because it is so
Oh,
wonderful. And you'll find out more about Hint as we have this conversation. But Kara, I'm so excited to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. And everyone, Kara wrote this book here. I was going to say all women entrepreneurs, but I really think it's for everyone. All entrepreneurs or people with an idea, or you think you might have an idea. This is the book, Kara Goldin, Undaunted, Overcoming Doubts and Doubters. I've been recommending it to everyone. I devoured it, as I told you, just because of this. Well, I love storytelling anyway, but just because
Yeah.
the stories really, I felt like I was in the room with you or in Whole Foods when you were going in on the day of your C-section. We'll try to talk about that. To get your things on the shelves. Talk about
Yeah.
commitment. so
Yeah,
every
totally.
yeah, so I want to tell everyone a little bit about you and then dive in. For those of you who don't know, Kara again is the founder and CEO of Hint, which is a $150 million company that she launched in 2005 that is the leading unsweetened water. She also hosts the podcast, The Kara Goldin Show, and she is the author of the amazing new book, as I just showed you, Undaunted, Overcoming Doubts and Doubters, which you can pre-order. So go to drinkhint.com/Elaine Fluker. So drinkhint.com/my name, Elaine Fluker, and you can pre-order the book now. It's out
It's
as of
out. Yeah.
Tuesday.
It came out
Yes,
last week.
it
Yeah.
did. Good. It came
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
They pre-order. I'm like, no, it's already out. That's right. So everyone, you can go order the book right now. And Kara's going to talk to us today about building Hint, but also about building your brand, not just your product, which I love is a lesson I got from the book. Getting your products into the stores, knowing when you should say no and why maybe means yes, and so much more. That's what we're going to talk about today.
That's it.
All right. So I want to start up. Everyone, as I said, there's so many great stories in here. And if any of you have any questions for Kara in general, doesn't have to be about the book, but about building your business, getting your product on the shelves and all that great stuff, please put it in the comments. I'll make sure I ask. But there were a lot of, for me, themes that were in the book that were just so powerful. So there's tons of stories. You all read it and see the stories. But Kara, I want to ask you about a couple of, well, I have like 20. We'll get to as many
Yeah.
as possible. I was
Go
going to
for
say a
it.
couple, but that's a lie. One
Yeah.
of the themes was no means maybe and maybe means yes. What does that mean?
Yeah, well, I remember, so I grew up the last of 5 kids, a super middle class family, and in Scottsdale, Arizona. My dad dragged us there from Minneapolis when I was a little girl, and he was tired of shoveling snow, and so we were like an original settler in Scottsdale. There was nobody there when I got there, and anyway, I remember, really fondly, challenging my dad on a daily basis when he was very comfortable with saying no because my brothers were, I think, really naughty more than anything. And so every time I asked to do something, by the time it got to me, he was like, no. And I'd
No.
say, why? And he'd say, because. And I'd say, well, that's not really an answer. And so it ends up that after a while, my dad would say, see, the problem is that when I say no, you actually say, well, you're thinking in your mind, well, maybe, and stuff. And so obviously that saying has had some more serious connotations over the last few years. But for me as a kid, it just was really, looking at how somebody, if they're like, no, we can't put your product on the shelf. No, this isn't. I was always used to just asking like, why, and really believing that if they didn't actually come up with an answer that made sense to me, what I realized is that they often sort of are on autopilot and kind of saying it versus actually, knowing why they're saying no. So that I think is something. I think it's always easier to look back on when you've built a business that, in the rear view mirror. And it's something that I've thought a lot about because it's, I think we basically were able to build what we built because we didn't really have all the answers. And, and then I was used to saying, well, what do you mean by that? Like, we wanted to create an unsweetened flavored water that didn't have sweeteners in it. And there were a lot of people who said, well, it has to have sweetener, or it has to have sweeteners in it. It has to have preservatives in it. And I kept saying, why? And so, it's really, it if you have that kid in your house that is always asking why, don't be too hard on them, because it may ultimately help them to be a great business person and or later on in life.
Do you think that sort of helped build up your resilience to hearing the no? Because we all are going to hear no, throughout our lives, but certainly as an entrepreneur with an idea that's going against what the norm is. So creating Hint as an unsweetened water, and everyone else, including big beverage companies, saying that it has to be this way.
Yeah, totally. And I also think like there's something else that my parents used to say to me, everybody has a bad day when you're once in a while when you're growing up. And I remember my parents used to say, consider the source. And like if there was, like whatever, somebody would say something that I didn't believe in. What I learned along the way in building Hint is that I have a story in the book around a soda executive who was with the large soda company in Atlanta. And I was connected with him about a year into my journey and basically thought, oh, he's got all this industry experience. He's going to be able to solve all my problems because he knows how to do this and I know nothing. And when he said to me, sweetie, Americans love sweet, in about 15 minutes into this phone call, kind of dismissing what I was setting out to do. And ultimately, I was so excited by what I had built in the San Francisco Bay Area where I live. But I felt like, at that point, that was the first thing that I thought about. Like at first, he caught me really off guard by calling me sweetie.
Sweetie,
But
right.
then, yeah, but then after a few minutes of hearing exactly what his kind of mission was, which really wasn't a mission at all. It was really kind of a like, here's my path. I want to trick consumers into believing that products like Diet Coke, which was my issue, are healthier than they are. And they're focused on having products with lower calories. So when I launched Hint, there were lots of diet drinks out there that had 10 calories and they weren't to zero yet. And so he was sharing that his goal at, this large soda company was really to get down to 0 calories, and that's really what consumers wanted. And never in that 1 hour conversation did he mention the word health. And here I was with my idea mentioning like, this helps consumers to drink water, to get healthy, to control type 2 diabetes, but it was all health related. And so when he was saying something that was so condescending to me, I guess it is and rude and lots of other words come to mind. I basically went back to this thing that I talked about earlier, which is consider the source, and it just doesn't matter. And he's on his path and you're on your path, and so that's what I did. But the other thing that it really helped me to kind of get clarity around was that he wasn't going to go and build this business because he didn't think it was important. He wasn't getting to see the same messages that I was getting from consumers that were saying, you've really helped me to drink water. You've really helped me to control my type 2 diabetes. You've really helped me, to recognize that these diet sweeteners are the things that are really kind of interfering with my ability to lose weight. Or, it was amazing. From day one, consumers were the ones that were really, gave me the energy that I needed to kind of keep moving forward, especially during hard days, and especially when there's people that say stuff to you that you don't believe. And frankly, I think it's the same lessons in your personal life, right? Like if you think about consider the source, when people say things that are just wrong, then you just move on. It's easier to just be, to kind of squash what they're saying and find your tribe and, and keep moving, because it's always going to happen. And we know it, right? And there's only so much control you've got over those, stupid people, right? And then you just keep moving forward and you don't stop it. So, I mean, those are some of the stories that I talk about in this book, that, there were a million people that would say, you've got 4 kids. How are you going to build a business? Like, and I mean, they don't even have to say that they don't believe in you, right? Like, it's like they
Right.
just say that line and you're like, okay, I know where you are, right?
Right.
On this. But again, I think, it gives me a lot of pleasure to see a lot of people, remember what they said too, and that I just kept going and kept trying and kept, and many times I fell down too. And that's really what I talk about in the book, that the book's called Undaunted, Overcoming Doubts and Doubters. And the thing that I think is so key for people to remember is that, entrepreneurism is kind of a sexy thing. Like everybody wants to be like an entrepreneur. It's a hard road, and it's often, a very lonely road. And I certainly had doubts along the way, and doubters and fears and failures. But I think that the key thing is that if you keep trying, then your successes start to add up. And then you're like, whoa, I'm kind of making some progress here. I feel pretty good about it. And it's actually sort of does, kind of the opposite. You move into a new space versus actually being so filled with doubt. So that was really my goal, to kind of share my story in hopes that, not only entrepreneurs, but maybe people who kind of have personal things that they're trying to figure out too, that you can do things. I really do believe that you can keep moving forward if you set your mind to doing it. And sometimes you just have to go try different things in order to understand whether or not you can do it and you can accomplish something, or if you're interested in it too.
Right. I think one of the things too that you mentioned in the book was this idea of really looking at, like you said, why is a person saying no, for example, of how you go about solving the problem. Like maybe it is a
Mm-hmm.
no because something is missing or something went wrong as far as business goes and that kind of thing. So is that something too that you recommend for any of the entrepreneurs watching? It's sort of like, maybe it's a no, but think about, how can I solve this problem if this is a problem you do want to solve? Because you started
Totally.
to solve a problem
Yeah.
for yourself, right?
Yeah, and I think like that's the thing, that there were, so many points along the way where there were these people who were saying, "Oh, you can't do that. You can't do this." And I certainly agreed with them to some level, but what I kept saying is, "What can we do?"
Mhm.
So I think like that's another thing that is like so important. Like you may not be able to, you know, really do everything that you want to do. Maybe you're, strapped for cash. Maybe you like don't have enough people. Maybe, maybe the consumer isn't quite ready for what you're trying to come up with. But I think if you start to see progress along the way and then remind yourself that like you have a goal out there for getting there, and what can we do today, I think is the most important question, one of the most important questions that you want to just keep, asking, reminding yourself to ask.
Yes, and Barbara's here. Barbara, I'll put up your comment. Barbara says, "Oh my God, I'm bootstrapping my dog treat brand, Lick You Silly Pet Products. How can our journeys be so similar?" Yay, Barbara, good for you. Keep going. Don't get
Keep
up.
going.
No,
Exactly.
no means maybe, maybe means yes. Let us know if you have any questions,
Exactly.
Barbara. So another theme, Kara, was to knowing when you're on to something before you launch. So on page 93, you said, be perfect enough to deliver on the basic promise. And I wanted to mention that because I think even though we have men and women watching, I know a lot of us, especially as women entrepreneurs, want to get it perfect, whatever that means, right? But I love
So
that line
much.
of be perfect enough to deliver on your basic promise. Can you talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah, it won't be perfect, right?
Right.
And I
Just
think
let it go.
right, and I think, like, the hardest thing for me was realizing I was never on I mean, I did some innovation when I was at, some of my former companies, and I sort of when they were small, but then they got big. But I think that the key thing that I realized is that we didn't have the money. We didn't have, the we couldn't be perfect, right? And in some cases, we didn't even know until we were, like, 3/4 of the way done to actually getting there. Or like in the case of our water, initially I had this vision for the labels. I'm looking down at my product. The labels on our product were clear when we first launched, because I thought,
Right.
okay, we have a clear product and we should have the entire thing be clear. And then once we got it on the shelf at Whole Foods, what I realized is that the lighting in the store would actually greatly impact And in addition, like the people that were sitting next to me on the shelf. So if I had vitamin water with like, beautiful, bright label sitting right next to me, my product was just lost. And so that's the thing that, you need to start somewhere, and you need to be able to get the consumer feedback. And no focus group would have like been able to kind of share those kind of insights with me. They might have had opinions about, but I'm such a big believer that you just have to start somewhere and do the best job you can and get it out there, and maybe do, in the case of labels, like, we ended up throwing away some labels once we made that change, or, do small runs of things just to kind of just get it out there. And, you don't have to have like the best artists and packaging in the world in order to do it, because you can always upgrade. Like the
Right.
consumer is very open to you upgrading things along the way, like as you learn.
We
So
think
I
this is
think,
how I started, so I have to stay like this forever.
yeah,
Right.
or you think like, oh gosh, I'm selling right now and I don't want to disrupt. Okay, but you can swap things out after a while, and and again, set a goal for when you're ultimately ready to do that. And
Mhm.
obviously, if you have a food or beverage item, you want to make sure that it's safe for the consumer. And so, we never skimped on the actual product. We were always like making sure, but there were making sure that it was safe. But there were always like things that we kept thinking, like, I wish, right? And they would always be sitting there in our wish list to ultimately, have goals, right? And
Mhm.
I think it's the story of life, right? Have goals and have, wishes that you want to see happen. And I think it's no different than actually launching a product or
And I
service.
think to your point about almost like seeing it out in the world, as you said, if you had a focus group and spent, tens of thousands of dollars having focus group talk about the labels and how much they loved it, and they love that it's clear, and then you see it on the shelf, and it's like, oh,
Yeah.
actually, that might not work.
Well,
So
it's
sort of,
funny. I'm not a fan of focus groups, and I've been at companies where I've held, spent a lot of money, to your point, on focus
uh-huh.
groups. And I'll never forget this one guy that I worked with. He told me this story. He's older than I am, but he told me the story that he worked for this bank called Wells Fargo, and in the Bay Area, and they had this idea for this machine that would, basically allow the consumers, to come and get money from the machine. And they had a huge focus group, and they said, would you trust this machine to actually count the dollars and, and give you the money from your bank account, and versus like going into a bank? And 100% the focus group said, no way,
No.
we would never. And that was the ATM machine. And
Right.
I think about that story all the
That's a
time, and
good
I
one.
share it with people because, of course, right after the ATM machine launched, then all these banks were saying, how do we get the people to come back inside? Right.
Right.
Like, it's just, and so I really think like consumers don't ultimately know what they're looking for. And you actually, as Steve Jobs used to say, you actually have to share with them. You have to understand problems. You have to be inquisitive and curious, and like want to understand, like, what is that problem? What is that why that you're solving for? And then come up with a plan for, okay, well, what about if we did this? Would that solve the consumer's problem? And I think like that's the way to constantly be thinking about just consumer products or services.
I think, and it's different than what we said about the guy at the big beverage company. Of you're not tricking the consumer; you're explaining to them the why of why this might work for them or why they might need this. Because I've heard people talk about being too far ahead, and I don't know. I mean, Hint is something different. Other companies are, Steve Jobs, what he developed with Apple was quote unquote different. So nothing wrong with different, but how do you make sure? Or I think what you just shared is sort of how you can make sure that you're not outpacing the consumer. You're sort of bringing them along the way, I guess is the way I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting. I knew a few months into launching Hint 15 years ago that I was a little ahead of the consumer. And
Yeah.
so then I made a decision. I could have shut the company down at that point. It wasn't that we weren't getting consumers, it was that the only way to actually sell product was to get into stores. And so our biggest challenge was actually talking to the buyers that were actually buying the product to put it on the store shelves. We not only developed a product, but we also developed an entirely new category, which is insane to do. We had no idea that we were doing this. It was called unsweetened flavored water. And so the problem was that we go into these buyers and we'd say, okay, we have this water that it has fruit in it and it's not sweetened. And they said, okay, well, we have a section for enhanced waters that have sweeteners in it, like vitamin water or diet sodas or plain water or soda. And I'm like, well, we're totally different. We fit somewhere in between like the diet sodas and then the enhanced waters. And, and we're a totally different category. And they're like, we can't put you in the planogram. So that was like, that was so hard. And I didn't know really how to get around that. And the only way we did get around it was to basically keep trying, right? And keep asking people. And we heard a lot of no's. And after a while, somebody would say, okay, fine. Like, you're here again. You seem nice. Fine. We'll give you like a little spot. And then we would really make sure that we were supporting the business and doing really well and like doing advertising around it and do all of those things that I think are super important. But I think that was like, it was at a time when, where I was going with this was like, we not only knew we were early, but we made a decision to kind of go slow at that point too, that there's this whole theory that I talk about a bit in the book too, around like going fast. And so people would say growth, you got to go super fast. Well, where the challenge comes for so many people who are founding companies is they go out and raise all this money. And then you've got investors that are like, you signed up for this number and if you're a little ahead of where the consumer or where the market is, then that's really hard to predict, right? Like, you don't know where the consumer will be. But if you've got, somebody breathing over your shoulder, basically saying, well, you've got to hit these numbers, that's really hard. And ultimately they'll shut your company down because they've invested and that's what they thought that the promise was. So we knew that early on. And that's why, we were really careful about picking the right investors, but then also we got traction for the first couple of years. And even if I had to go a little bit slower, and, the other thing I talk about in the book too, I had 4 kids under the age of 6. And so I was
a superhero. There's that.
I was like definitely working, but I also, my time was kind of limited to when I had a babysitter, when my kids were away at school, and so I was like, okay with, I certainly wasn't working part-time, but I kind of was on this flexible schedule where if somebody wanted to meet me at like 4:00, I wasn't going to be able to meet them. And I'd be, figuring out, okay, when can I do it at like 10 a.m. when I've got, some sort of support to help me. And so I knew it would take even a little bit longer. But I also really appreciated the fact that, I wasn't clocking in somewhere to go and, find a job. I was just trying to, I was willing to work after my kids went to sleep at night and, and before they got up in the morning and then in between. But if I had to do meetings, for example, then I had to, figure out how to juggle that into my schedule. So I think being an entrepreneur also allows you to do that, and even supporting entrepreneurs. And, I look at it, there's never been a time when more women are walking away from because, of try, like, it's just not going to work with, their kids' schedule and doing school from home. I really believe that, if you've got an idea or you're thinking about something, or maybe, another founder out there that has got a great idea too, like trying to, really own the fact that like what you're looking for. And I think gone are the days when people will sit there and say, well, I want to have this person, but they want everything, right? Like, instead, I think you just have to be honest. You have to be useful to a company, but I think you have to be honest with what you ultimately want as well. And I think that oftentimes it's doable.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of the story in Undaunted. Everyone, again, we're talking to Kara Goldin. This is her book, Undaunted, and trying to get in the right place, which is has such great stories in it. And I
Yay.
think that
Thank
was one
you.
of the yeah, absolutely, the messages of the many that were in there too. Just this idea of whether you're working for a company or not, or just it was very much about not only creating the business that you wanted and something that was service to you and other people, but also the life that you wanted to create for you and your
Totally.
husband, who ended
Yeah.
up later becoming COO, I think, still, right?
Yeah.
COO, he
Yeah.
decided he wanted to
He's
be.
still the chief operating officer and,
Yeah,
was the lawyer for a while. And now we
right.
have outside counsel. He did a little bit of everything, but he did it, truly out of love though, too. I think it's like, that's another theme that I talk about in the book. It's whether you're married to your founder or you
Right.
want to pick a partner. It's like pick somebody with totally different skill sets where you guys can work together and you have appreciation for each other's skill sets versus being exactly the same. And you guys are both marketers, you're both finance people. Like, pick somebody who's really got a different skill set. But I think also, there's always going to be bad days or days that
Mhm.
you're really busy. Having somebody that works, hand in hand with you and is able to kind of pick up the slack when, you've got stuff to do with the kids or you've got, a book tour or something,
Right.
along the way. Like, I think it's being able to, have that yin and yang is so important.
Yeah, one of the things you just mentioned, and I had this on my list about growth. About okay, so I don't know if this was in the book, but I heard this on the interview you did with Guy Kawasaki recently, which was so great on
Mhm.
Remarkable People, that podcast. Everyone, if you haven't heard that, Kara was on there recently, or it aired recently, I should say. But you
Yeah.
talked about the term I thought of was being a practical visionary because you spoke about having the opportunity to go into Walmart early on and knowing when to turn down that opportunity or postpone maybe because you are in
Yeah.
Walmart now, I believe.
We're in Wallet.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so how do people, for anyone watching, sort of, I want to say, have the courage to turn those things down? Because people, I'm sure, might have been telling you, "Oh my gosh, it's Walmart! Isn't this what you want?" But being brave enough to say, "No,
Yeah.
not yet." Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I think I've always really had a big gauge on consumers, and I'm not like a classically trained marketer, I guess, or like I'm just a big thinker. Like I've always thought about where people shop and why did they shop there. And I felt like when I would go into Walmart stores that that's not that you never really saw new brands there. And
Mhm.
so that was the big thing that I kept coming back to. Like I wanted to find these new brands that were kind of like mine, that had sort of been built. And so
Mhm.
ultimately, I would when I would go into the buyer's offices, I would ask them, like, are there other brands like in other categories that are brand new, that are kind of like us, that are sort of disrupting the category? And they're like, okay,
No.
I get it. Like, no, there's just not. And so
Right.
that's what I said. Like, I didn't have anything against Walmart at all,
Right.
but I really felt like it just wasn't the right step. And so when people would say to me, like, I can't believe you're turning down Walmart, I'm like, it's not that I'm turning it down. I'm very in touch with who my consumer is and I want it to be successful. And so the buyers at Walmart actually really appreciated that, right? Because they didn't want to have a product
Mm.
that wasn't going to work. And so I said, like, I want to watch this and I want to really understand. And I think that the big reason why we decided to go into Walmart, in addition to us being a little bit bigger brand and we're in lots more stores, was that health has become such a huge initiative for so many
Right.
people. I mean, when I started this company 15 years ago, 2% of the population had type 2 diabetes versus today 45% has type 2 diabetes or
Jeez.
prediabetes. And so
Yeah.
oftentimes, many of these areas where Walmart has locations, they don't have access to, a Whole Foods or a Trader Joe's or someplace that is supposedly known for like healthier kind of food. And Walmart actually is starting to do a pretty good
Right. They
job
have
of
organic
providing.
sections and things now, and
Totally,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's
Yeah.
what I really started thinking, that like if we could just get the message out that we were in there, that there are, people that are really either are choosing to live that way or who should be living that way, need to start seeing our brands like show up in those stores so that it could really have them help them to get access to better quality food. So, so yeah, we love Walmart. We're in Sam's Club as well, and Costco, and lots of other
Target
places as
also, I
well as
think.
online. And Target, yeah,
Yes.
Target's a huge partner of ours. So, yeah, so that's kind of how we thought about it. But again, like, I don't know. I think so much of this is gut, and so much of this
Mhm.
is understanding like who your consumer was, and and I also really believed, even like people would ask, who's this consumer? And I'd say, well, the person who's shopping inside of grocery stores is a woman who's like, 25 to 54. But I knew that she had other people at home. Right. And
Mhm.
so I kept trying to figure out, like, what do they do? Where do they live? And so, or where they work. And so that's how we sort of thought about distribution too, while we were on a parallel path fighting it out with getting store, shelf space. We were also looking at, okay, are some of these people working at Google or Facebook? Are they in school? Are they, can we get into those, like, it's very, very hard to get into the vending machines. But in the case where some of these schools, like the private schools, have these lunchrooms where the kids are swiping their cards, and like even college campuses. So we tried to figure out, like, okay, they've been having it at home probably, and so can we bring it in that? So again, thinking differently about who this consumer is as well. And we had no idea whether or not we'd be right, but that I think ended up to be, really instrumental, and or I should say that was a huge reason why, we were able to grow and do what we did, because we just thought differently, and we didn't follow the rules and didn't do what everybody else was doing.
So I want to make sure to get this question in from Barbara. Of course, I have plenty others, but Barbara, I want to ask your question. How long did you bootstrap before seeking investors? So that's Barbara's question. And then I would love to hear from you, just Kara, because Kara talks in the book about how she got her products on the shelves in Whole Foods, and there's great stories about that. But also, do you think it's the same for an entrepreneur today with the product? Because so much has changed across all industries of quote unquote getting your things in the store. Are there some tips that you have for that? So how long did you bootstrap? And then what are your ideas about getting your products in the stores today?
Yeah, I mean, the first 2 years, because I knew I was a little bit further ahead than the rest of the consumers, that's that we personally invested in the company. And I think that the great news about that was that we actually had some traction before we went out and got investors. And then along the way, we kept thinking, okay, we live in Silicon Valley, and so we'll like go to Sand Hill Road, and where all the deals are done. And like a lot of those offices were actually drinking our product. But that's another thing that, I've learned along the way that I share with other entrepreneurs, is that, I never had a problem getting meetings with anyone. And especially they were already drinking hint in their offices. So they're like, oh, sure, come in. But people will not invest in something that they don't know. Right. And so if you have a dog treat and you're walking into a room filled with people that actually have never had dogs, they don't really understand, they're probably not going to invest. And so should you not actually go in the room and like have that meeting? It depends on how much time you have. Time is my most valuable thing, right? And
Mm-hmm.
especially being a working parent. And like, I think that you have to make those decisions. Maybe you go once, but you don't go, 2 and 3 times. I happen to hear stories about, some female entrepreneurs that end up having like 8 or 9 meetings with some of these investors. And,
With the same investor?
no, with the exact same investor. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And then I'll look at, the fact that they don't even
They're
invest in like
right.
in their category. And I'm like, I don't know. They might just want a lunch date. Like, I don't
Right.
know. Call me
Exactly.
crazy.
I don't
Right.
know if that's a
But
good use of your time.
yeah, like you just really have to think about it. And oftentimes, investors, the other thing I share too is they won't necessarily tell you that they don't know, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, that's the other thing that, nobody wants to admit. I'm great at admitting I know nothing about stuff, but most
Mm-hmm.
people actually don't do that. They actually say, "Oh yeah, I know everything about the beverage industry," and they don't. And things that they feared, like that, the big soda companies were going to crush us like that. Just that's the kind of stuff that I learned along the way, and that I try and really help entrepreneurs with as well, that fish where the fish are, because it's like it just doesn't change over time. And I think it's, if you're focused on getting the big, Silicon Valley investors, like make sure that you've actually got a product that they've invested in before, in at least in that category.
In that category, right? Thank you. Excellent. Letitia said here, great conversation. Thank you, Letitia. And then Barbara said, yep, that happened to me with my first startup with a VC firm. All right. And she just got her products into Walmart. So that's great.
That's
Congratulations.
great.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So what do you think then about getting your products in the stores today? How are you advising, say, an entrepreneur who has a product today, a food product or beverage, or I guess anything that would want to be on the shelves? What's the journey like today versus, when you did it before?
I don't think it really changes in terms of like you've got to find some stores to start in, and then you've
Should you
got to have
start with smaller stores?
yeah, and get turns and ones that you can kind of watch and see what's going on, see the lighting, see how consumers are responding. Like I would sit there in the aisles and like kind of watch consumers. I still do. I still watch how they're doing it, and I think like you can't rely on stores or distributors to actually watch your product either. That's something that I kept thinking, okay, we're in Whole Foods. And like, I mean, if you're lucky, the people that work there will actually straighten out your product and make sure that it's from the back stock. More than likely, you'll have a competitor come in and then they'll try and put product in your space. And so you always have to be, doing what you can do with, the limited number of people that you have too. And I think that's another thing that nobody really shared with me. Instead, it was like, oh, I'm going to go and get this big account and this big distributor. And like, it's so great, like sounds big, but if you fail, then, it's going to be, it's going to be harder. It's not impossible. That's another thing, to get back into stores when you get kicked out. I've been told like, you never want to get kicked out because then, you'll never get back in there. I mean, we've been kicked out of plenty of stores, but it takes time to get back in. And you have to really understand, again, owning kind of like your story and knowing what
Oh.
happened. If you go into someplace, too early, I think that the key thing is being able to know like why something didn't work out and why it failed. And like, did they have the wrong SKU mix? That's another thing that I've learned in the grocery industry, is that you're sort of at the mercy of the buyer. Like everybody, that we ran into wanted in sort of better, like, high-end stores wanted cucumber water. And it ends up the cucumber water, well, I love it, is actually a niche product, right? And so
Hmm.
the things that were actually really safe for consumers, and what they didn't, even if they hadn't tried our product, they would like pick it up and they would give it a try, is the blackberry and the watermelon and the cherry. They're familiar with those, tastes, right? And so we would always, oftentimes we wouldn't allow buyers to, like, we wouldn't even show them that we had a cucumber water. We'd say, oh, we're out of stock on cucumber. I don't know when it's coming back, because we knew that, even though it was kind of weird and they wanted to be unique, all these buyers want to be unique. Well, guess what? The consumer, like, they may say they want unique, but they
But
won't.
they want, yeah,
They
they want
won't.
cherry. Yeah.
They want cherry, right? And especially if they don't know your brand. And
Hmm.
so that's the thing I think that is so important for people to recognize. It's people have to be able to, you know, like, people like to say that they're a little weird and they're a little unique and different, but like the reality is that most people aren't.
I think that's a good point too. Like you said, especially if they're trying something new. Like if you like cucumber water, you like it. Yes, you might try it. But if you're trying a new brand, you still want something familiar about it, whether it's the flavor or at least what you see of
Totally.
the flavor or something like that. So that's good to know. So before we let you go, I do want to, you mentioned owning your story, which is one of my themes, Kara. I wanted to talk about owning your story, how you built the Hint brand, not just the product. That was something I felt was an ongoing theme throughout. And I wanted to ask you what happened in 2012 to let you know that you had a brand. That was on page 157, if you'd like me to read any of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the key thing really is, I mean, I think that the brand all along has really been around health. And
Mhm.
so, a few different things like come to mind when I think about that, that, we had investors, we had a couple of our investors, they were smaller investors, but they were still investors who were saying to us like, "Oh, we can actually, you guys can grow sales if you add sweeteners to your product." And I was like, "But that's the whole
That's
point
the whole
and
point,
purpose of our
right?
product, right?" And so I think really understanding what your brand is and putting stakes in the ground around it, that you might be able to grow faster if you go and do things that you're not really comfortable doing. But I firmly believe that, especially if you believe you're a mission based company, that you had a why for starting the company, like you need to just put stakes in the ground. And oftentimes you'll have people around you that are saying, go put sweeteners, they're natural or whatever in the product, and you as the founder really need to like hold steady on that mission, because again, you may be a little lonely doing it, but I think the minute that you start to waver, that's when a lot of other things start to crumble. So I think it's such an important piece that always come back to, why did I build this brand, and what was the idea, like where was the hole in the market, what was I trying to do?
And then sticking to your values too. I know you talked about in the book in 2008 that everyone was being encouraged to discount their products, but you were very adamant that you didn't want to do that with Hint in the stores, of making sure that it wasn't discounted, even though everyone was saying this is what you have to do.
Yeah, I mean, literally, like they were, telling us to just give them product and then they would make money and we wouldn't make any money. And so I was like, that's a really bad deal. Like that sounds
Right.
terrible. So why, like, we'll be out of business, but you won't be, like, and so, that again, like the little tricks that go on, you've got to stick up for yourself and you've got to do what's right for your business. And I mean, there's so many stories along the way, that I share in the book too, that really, kind of go back to this as well. That the stuff that you just couldn't make it up. And at the time, we would hear these things, and it was like really hard decisions, but we kept coming back to the idea of like share how you just were like trying to grapple with this. You really wanted the relationship to work, but
Right.
like how can I make money? And if the answer was, well, you have to figure that out, or you're not going to make any money, then you have to know your walk away. And I think like that's a life decision too, that I've, learned as well, and something that I've, tried to share with my kids as well. It's like, sometimes people just don't, they're not where you are, right? They're in their own world of trying to save their own business or their job, or I a lot of different situations go through my head, and I think that at the end of the day, you really have to know who you are and know who
Mhm.
your business is. And and as a guy that I used to work for a long time ago, John McCain, when we disagreed on some various things, he said, Kara, sometimes you have to agree to disagree. And what I learned then is some of the things that we disagreed on way back when, he came around to agreeing on later on in life. So you can still show that
Right. You
you're
can
right.
evolve.
Yeah, that you
Exactly.
can evolve. So it doesn't mean that
Right.
they're totally wrong, right?
That's
So
right. That's
they were just
right.
wrong at the moment. So,
Right.
and I
That's
remind, I remind some of those stores now, like I remember in 2008, 2009, when you all wanted
it.
me to do things that were not right for my business, but, and they say, okay, well, that was way back
That
when. I
was
mean,
then, right? You're like, yeah, but I remember. That's right.
but
So she had. Shahara said, start with your why. Such an important lesson. Yes, Shahara. So, Kara, before we let you go, I do want to know you to tell everyone about how Hint is expanding. I know you have some other products and brands, or I guess other categories that you're going
Yeah.
into.
I mean, really expanding around health over the last few years. We came out with a sunscreen. We have a deodorant. We most recently came out with a hand sanitizer that we're using the
Oh,
fruit. I know
where
it's
is
so
that?
good.
On your website?
Online. So you can find all of this on drinkhint.com. And,
Okay.
definitely our core business is the water. But, we have fun around health and now we're disrupting a lot of other industries and showing people how to actually do it right, it's just been a lot of fun doing it.
And what I read about the sanitizer is it has a scent too, right? When you first put it on, like a pleasurable scent and not toxic,
Oh
like
yeah,
a lot of sanitizers.
we're using the fruit from the bottles from the
From the
water.
water.
Yeah, so it comes in clementine, grapefruit, and lime.
Excellent. So everyone,
Yeah.
make sure you buy this book, Kara's book,
Thank you.
Undaunted, Overcoming Doubts and Doubters. It's so good. I mean, there's so many themes
Come
and
visit
things in
me,
here.
and we have lots
Yeah,
of
we're
discussions on LinkedIn and Facebook and lots of other platforms
and
at Kara
Instagram.
Goldin. Yeah, and
You're at
Instagram.
Kara Goldin across all platforms.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
excellent. Very good. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate you. Make sure you go to drinkhint.com/Elaine Fluker. You can get the book, the water, the sanitizer, everything should be there on that page, I believe, or at least on the website. So Kara, thank you so much. Hold on just a
thanks
second.
so much, you guys.